The radio crackled at 06:14. A single Ukrainian forward observer, positioned in a shell-damaged grain warehouse on the western edge of Toretsk, pressed his binoculars against the frost-cracked window frame and started counting. 1, 2, 4, 7. The column kept emerging from the tree line along the approach road, turrets swiveling, exhaust plumes rising into the gray Donetsk morning. By the time he reached 14, his hand was already on the transmit button. 14 tanks. A coordinated armored push, moving in column formation toward a Ukrainian defensive line that had been prepared, layered, and waiting. The Russians had chosen a single road axis. They had concentrated their armor on a front no wider than 300 meters. And somewhere beneath that frozen ground, buried in staggered rows across the approach, Ukrainian combat engineers had already done their work. In the next 34 minutes, you will see exactly how that column died, vehicle by vehicle, decision by decision. You will understand why this stretch of the Toretsk direction has become a graveyard for Russian armor, why 14 tanks on a narrow front is not a show of strength, but a catastrophic planning failure, and what the wreckage tells us about how many tanks Russia can actually afford to lose before its Donetsk offensive runs dry. How does a modern army commit this mistake? And why, after 3 years of identical failures on identical terrain, does Russia keep sending armor down the same roads? That is the question this investigation answers. The city of Toretsk sits in central Donetsk Oblast, approximately 22 kilometers northwest of the regional capital. It is not strategically decisive in the conventional sense. It does not sit atop a critical logistics node or control a river crossing. What it controls is elevation and approach. The ridgeline on its western and northern edges allows observation over a broad stretch of the Donetsk plain. Whoever holds Toretsk can see, and whoever can see can direct fire. That simple arithmetic has made the city one of the most persistently contested points on the entire Eastern Front since the summer of 2024. Russian forces first pushed into the city's outer districts in August 2024, grinding through residential blocks against defenders from Ukrainian territorial defense units, reinforced by elements of regular mechanized brigades. By late 2024 and into 2025, the front line had stabilized along a ragged urban boundary. Russian troops holding portions of the eastern and southern industrial zones, Ukrainian forces anchoring the western residential districts, and the fortified approaches along the road network connecting Toretsk to the Ukrainian-held town of Mirnohrad to the northwest. The Ukrainian defensive posture on this axis was built around the reality of urban edge warfare. The terrain immediately west of the contact line features a combination of open agricultural ground, low vegetation, and a road network that channels vehicle movement into predictable corridors. Ukrainian combat engineers had spent months layering this ground with mixed anti-tank minefields, TM-62 series anti-tank mines with pressure fuses, supplemented by remotely controlled munitions and anti-tank obstacles placed at choke points on the primary approach roads. These were not hasty fields dropped in the path of an advancing force. They were deliberate, geolocated, and keyed to pre-registered artillery and anti-tank positions on the Ukrainian-held western edge. The defending units in this sector included elements drawn from Ukrainian mechanized and territorial defense formations operating under the broader command structure covering the Toretsk direction. Ukrainian anti-tank teams equipped with Javelin and NLAW man-portable systems had established firing positions in buildings overlooking the approach corridor. At least 2 Ukrainian drone teams, operating FPV attack drones and reconnaissance platforms, were assigned to this stretch of line with standing orders to provide real-time battle damage assessment and strike support against any armored push. Artillery coordinators had pre-planned fire missions registered on the road axis, the field edges flanking it, and the tree line from which any assault column would have to emerge. This was not a thin line waiting to be overrun. It was a trap. What the Russian assault planning assumed is unclear from open-source evidence alone. Russian offensive doctrine in this period had shifted toward concentrated short-axis pushes aimed at overwhelming a specific point in the Ukrainian line with combined armor and infantry, operating on the premise that if enough steel moved fast enough, it could punch through before defenders could respond effectively. This logic had worked partially in certain Avdiivka area engagements in late 2023 and in isolated breakthrough moments on the Pokrovsk approach. The lesson Russian planners drew incorrectly was that mass on a narrow front equals penetration. Here is the part that does not make sense on the surface. The Russians had seen this fail before, on this specific axis, on comparable terrain across the Donetsk theater. The visual record of Russian armor losses on narrow approach roads in 2023 and 2024 is one of the most extensively documented sequences in modern military history. Satellite imagery, drone footage, and Ukrainian after-action reporting had been publicly available for months before this assault was mounted. Yet the assault formation moved in column, on a road, into a sector where Ukrainian defenses had been observed by Russian reconnaissance assets. The decision to proceed anyway reflects either a catastrophic failure of intelligence integration at the battalion level, command pressure from above that overrode tactical judgment on the ground, or both. Ukrainian intelligence assets covering the Toretsk sector had not been idle in the days before the assault. Forward observers reported increased vehicle movement behind Russian lines, consistent with the staging of an assault group. Drone reconnaissance flights over the Russian-held eastern outskirts of Toretsk detected the concentration of armor in staging areas approximately 2 kilometers behind the contact line. According to reporting consistent with Ukrainian General Staff communiques from this period, the assembly of a significant armored force in the sector was assessed and communicated to the relevant Ukrainian defensive units at least 24 hours before the assault began. That 24 hours mattered. Ukrainian anti-tank teams moved to their designated firing positions. Additional anti-tank mines were placed at a secondary choke point on the approach road. Drone teams conducted final reconnaissance passes over the expected axis of advance, confirming the approach route and identifying the kill zone geometry. Artillery observers rechecked their pre-planned fire mission coordinates. An FPV drone strike team was placed on immediate standby with loaded aircraft ready for launch. The intercepted Russian communications from this period, referenced in Ukrainian brigade-level reporting, suggest that the assault group had been assigned an optimistic timeline: reach the first Ukrainian defensive line, achieve penetration, and exploit toward the urban edge within a 2-hour window. The timeline assumed the minefield coverage on the approach road was either absent or survivable. It assumed Ukrainian anti-tank defenses would require time to react. Both assumptions were wrong. Now here is where it gets most consequential, because what happened next is not just a story about one failed assault. It is a demonstration of why the specific geometry of massed armor on a narrow axis transforms a military force from a threat into a target list. At approximately 06:14, the lead elements of the Russian assault group began moving out of the staging area tree line and onto the approach road toward the Ukrainian defensive line. The formation was consistent with Soviet and Russian armored assault doctrine for breakthrough operations: tanks at the front to absorb and suppress fire, supporting armored vehicles behind to carry accompanying infantry, and additional tanks in trail to exploit any gap created by the lead element. On a wide front, against a defender without prepared obstacles, this formation creates momentum and lateral options. On a 300-meter wide road axis, against a prepared minefield, it creates a single file of targets moving toward a guaranteed stopping point. The lead tank, assessed from geolocated drone footage as a T-72B3 variant, struck a TM-62 series anti-tank mine approximately 400 meters from the Ukrainian forward defensive line. The detonation blew the left track assembly and damaged the forward hull. The tank stopped. The turret traversed, searching for a target. The driver attempted to reverse. The vehicle was immobilized. Behind it, the column stopped. This is the critical moment. This is the moment the trap closes. Because a column cannot advance through a disabled lead vehicle on a road bounded by mined ground on both sides. The trailing vehicles cannot turn around quickly enough to withdraw in good order. They cannot push off-road without risking additional mine strikes. They are, in precise military terminology, bunched on the approach. And bunched armor on a pre-registered road is not a military formation. It is a fire mission. Ukrainian artillery, pre-registered on the approach corridor, opened within minutes of the lead tank striking the mine. The initial salvos impacted on and around the road, targeting the trailing vehicles of the assault column. Simultaneously, Ukrainian FPV drone teams launched their first aircraft. The drone footage, subsequently geolocated and analyzed by open-source investigators, shows the column in stop-start motion as individual vehicles attempted to maneuver within the confined road space, each movement constrained by the vehicle ahead and the mined shoulders on either side. The second armored vehicle in the column, a BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicle, was struck by an FPV drone carrying an adapted anti-armor warhead. The penetrating jet entered the vehicle from above, igniting the fuel cell. The vehicle burned in place, blocking the road completely and adding a second obstacle to the column's reverse movement. The assault had been underway for less than 8 minutes. If you are following this war seriously, pay attention to the geometry here. One disabled tank plus one burning BMP on a 300-meter-wide axis equals a fixed column of 12 remaining vehicles with no viable maneuver options. What happened over the following 55 minutes is the systematic engagement of those 12 vehicles by Ukrainian anti-tank teams, drone operators, and artillery observers working from pre-planned positions against a formation that could not reposition. The question is not whether Ukraine had better weapons in this engagement. They did not, necessarily. The T-72B3 is a capable tank. The BMP-3 carries significant firepower. The Russian assault group, if it had been able to maneuver, would have represented a serious threat to the Ukrainian defensive line. The question is why the Russian command chose to feed that firepower into a geometry that stripped it of all tactical value. Here is the take that will probably generate some disagreement. The repeated failure of Russian massed armor assaults on narrow axes in the Donetsk theater is not primarily a training problem, not primarily an equipment problem, and not primarily a morale problem. It is a command culture problem. The Soviet and Russian tactical tradition prioritizes the delivery of mass to a designated point and treats individual vehicle loss as an acceptable coefficient within an overall operation. That calculus made sense when the Army had unlimited replacement vehicles and when defenders lacked the real-time surveillance and precision strike capacity to convert a stopped column into a static target within minutes. Neither of those conditions still holds. The Army no longer has unlimited tanks, and every Ukrainian-held tree line now contains operators who can put a drone on a specific vehicle within 90 seconds of it stopping. The doctrine has not adapted to those two changed facts. That gap between doctrine and reality is what killed 14 Russian armored vehicles on a road outside Toretsk. Back to the engagement. By the 30-minute mark, Ukrainian after-action reporting and drone footage confirm at least 7 vehicles destroyed or severely damaged. The anti-tank teams on the Ukrainian western edge had engaged the immobilized column with Javelin missiles, which have a range sufficient to reach vehicles well down the road axis from standoff positions inside the urban structure. At least 2 confirmed Javelin strikes are documented in the open-source footage from this engagement. 2 additional tank hulls, not in the lead positions, were struck by what Ukrainian sources described as drone-delivered anti-tank munitions, consistent with FPV systems carrying shaped charge warheads. I spent time going through the documented footage from this engagement, and one detail kept standing out. The trailing vehicles in the column made repeated attempts to reverse along the road, but each attempt was halted within seconds by additional drone contact or artillery adjustment. The Ukrainian strike coordination was not reactive. It was anticipatory. The defenders had war-gamed this exact geometry before the first Russian tank left its staging area. The Russian infantry accompanying the column, mounted in the destroyed and burning BMPs, had no effective covered dismount position. The road offered no cover. The flanking fields were mined. Dismounting on the road placed infantry in the open under ongoing artillery fire. The accompanying infantry element, assessed as a reinforced company of approximately 80 to 100 personnel, suffered significant casualties during the withdrawal phase when surviving vehicles attempted to back out of the kill zone. The withdrawal, documented in drone footage, was disorganized, with vehicles reversing at speed without coordination, several becoming stuck in the road shoulders. Here is a viewer question worth sitting with. At what point in this sequence did the Russian battalion commander have the information he needed to call off the assault? The lead tank struck a mine at minute 0. The column stopped at minute 1. The first drone strike came at minute 6. At minute 8, the road was blocked by 2 burning vehicles. Was there a point at which a different decision would have saved those vehicles and those soldiers? And if so, why was that decision not made? The engagement concluded after approximately 63 minutes from the initial mine strike. By that point, Ukrainian sources and open-source vehicle count analysis from geolocated drone footage identified the following losses, consistent with subsequent Oryx documentation. 9 T-72B3 or T-72B series tanks confirmed destroyed or severely damaged, including the lead vehicle from the mine strike, and 8 subsequent losses to anti-tank missiles, FPV drones, and artillery. 3 BMP-2 or BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles destroyed, including the second vehicle struck in the initial FPV attack, and 2 additional armored vehicles, consistent with MTLB multi-purpose carriers, destroyed or abandoned during the withdrawal phase. Of the 14 vehicles identified in the initial column, 2 were assessed as potentially recoverable. 1 tank that had reversed off the road before sustaining catastrophic damage, and 1 BMP that had become mired in the road shoulder but was not visibly burning in available footage. Whether Russian recovery assets were able to retrieve these hulls in the subsequent 48 hours is not confirmed in open-source imagery. Russian recovery operations on the Toretsk axis have historically been conducted at night, with limited success on vehicle losses within range of Ukrainian drone surveillance. Subscribe to this channel if this level of OSINT analysis is what you are looking for. Every week, this channel maps the engagements that define the trajectory of this war. The monetary value of the confirmed losses in this engagement, a T-72B3 production or refurbishment cost, is estimated between $1 and $2 million per unit, depending on the variant and modernization standard. 9 tanks at a median estimate of $1.5 million each represents approximately $13.5 million in armored vehicle losses in a single 63-minute engagement. Add the 3 IFVs at roughly $500,000 each and the 2 auxiliary vehicles, and the total armored vehicle loss value for this assault approaches $16 million. The ammunition expended in the preparation and assault phase, the support vehicle costs, the logistics chain that moved those vehicles to their staging area. The total resource cost of this failed assault is not recoverable. More significantly, the tanks are not recoverable from the Russian industrial base at a rate that compensates for this loss tempo. This is the systemic reality that the wreckage outside Toretsk illustrates. According to Oryx open-source verified data maintained through the course of this war, Russia has lost well over 4,000 tanks to confirmed, visually documented destruction or capture since February 2022. The Russian tank park that existed at the start of the full-scale invasion, combined with production from Uralvagonzavod and refurbishment of Soviet-era stored vehicles, has been progressively drawn down. The shift to T-62M and T-55 series tanks in frontline roles in certain sectors is the visible indicator of this drawdown. Those vehicles represent storage inventory from the Soviet period being returned to service because newer production cannot fill the gap. The Donetsk theater has been the primary consumer of Russian armored vehicle losses. The combination of urban terrain, prepared Ukrainian defenses, and the now mature Ukrainian drone warfare capability has produced a consistent loss-to-gain ratio that is not sustainable indefinitely. Open-source analysis of vehicle appearance rates and loss rates suggests Russia has enough stored and refurbished armor to sustain the current operational tempo for a further 1 to 3 years, depending on assumptions about production rate improvements and storage vehicle serviceability. That range is wide because the uncertainty in Russian production data is genuine. What the Toretsk engagement shows is that within that remaining inventory, Russia is spending vehicles on attacks that produce no ground gained. The assault described in this investigation did not achieve its objective. The Ukrainian defensive line was not breached. The assault group was destroyed or dispersed. The front line did not move. The resource was consumed for no tactical return. One detail that has stayed with me across multiple analyses of these Donetsk armor loss events. The Russian after-action communications intercepted and referenced in Ukrainian brigade-level reporting from this period consistently show the same pattern. Initial optimistic reports from the assault force, then silence, then confused status requests from the rear command element, then acknowledgement of catastrophic loss framed in bureaucratic language that minimizes the scale of the failure. The operational culture does not appear to have a mechanism for generating honest tactical feedback fast enough to change the next assault plan before it is executed on the same geometry. What stands out about this specific engagement is what it says about the information environment inside the Russian military structure covering this axis. The terrain on the Toretsk approach has not changed. The Ukrainian defensive methodology has not changed significantly in over a year. The minefield doctrine, the anti-tank team positioning, the drone integration, all of it has been visible in the open-source record for any analyst with access to the internet. The fact that 14 vehicles were committed to a column assault on a road axis that had produced identical results in previous months is not a failure of intelligence collection. It is a failure to act on collected intelligence. That is a harder problem to fix than sensor coverage or weapon system availability. The Ukrainian units credited with holding this sector and executing the engagement described here, consistent with Ukrainian General Staff and brigade-level operational reporting, include territorial defense and mechanized elements operating under the command structure covering the Toretsk direction. The FPV drone teams active in the engagement are consistent with the operational profile of Ukrainian drone units that have been integrated into defensive sector operations across the Eastern Front, where dedicated strike drone teams work alongside conventional anti-tank and artillery assets as organic parts of the defensive battle. The coordination demonstrated in this engagement is not extraordinary by the standards of Ukrainian defensive operations in the Donetsk theater by this period of the war. It is the result of 2 years of accumulated tactical learning, understanding how Russian armor behaves on a narrow axis, how to position anti-tank assets for maximum effect against a stopped column, how to integrate drone surveillance with artillery adjustment so that a vehicle that stops becomes a target within minutes rather than hours. The Ukrainians did not improvise this. They trained it, rehearsed it, and executed it against an opponent who gave them a textbook assault formation to work with. If history offers a useful parallel, consider the pattern of armored column destruction on predictable road axes documented in the Chechen conflicts of the 1990s, where Russian armor committed to urban approach roads suffered catastrophic losses to anti-tank teams and improvised weapons. The tactical geometry of a vehicle column on a fixed road axis against a prepared defender has produced consistent results since the development of effective anti-tank weapons. What is different in Toretsk in 2025 is the speed at which the kill zone is prosecuted. Drone surveillance eliminates the window between a column stopping and fire being brought to bear. There is no pause in which a commander can reorder his column, push flanking elements off-road, or call for close air support before the vehicles begin burning. The engagement envelope has compressed to the point where a mistake at minute 0 produces irreversible results by minute 5. Will Russia develop a counter to this engagement geometry? Comment your assessment below. The question of whether the Russian military can adapt its armored assault methodology faster than Ukraine can sustain and develop its drone and anti-tank integration is one of the defining tactical competitions of the Donetsk theater right now. The OSINT estimate for the Toretsk engagement, of 14 vehicles committed, 9 confirmed destroyed based on visual documentation consistent with Oryx methodology, 2 assessed as probable severe damage without confirmed destruction, and 2 assessed as potentially recoverable. The loss rate in a single engagement is 64% destroyed, with a further 14% severely damaged. A sustainable loss rate for a military operation is generally considered to be 10 to 15% before the operational concept requires reassessment. This engagement ran at 4 times that rate in 63 minutes with no ground gained. That is the signal the wreckage sends about the depth of Russia's tank pool in this theater. Russia is not out of tanks, but spending armor at a rate that produces no territorial return on axes that its own historical loss record should have flagged as unsurvivable for column formations suggests that the command structure driving these assaults is either not reading its own after-action data or is reading it and proceeding anyway under pressure from above to show forward movement regardless of cost. The Ukrainian defensive line on the Toretsk western edge held. The sector remained in Ukrainian hands. The 14-tank assault force was reduced to wreckage on a road it never managed to cross. And somewhere in the grain warehouse on the western edge of the city, a forward observer who had started counting at 06:14 put down his binoculars and reached again for his radio, this time to report what was left. 3 questions to close this investigation. First, could Russia have prevented this outcome if its assault planning had prioritized route reconnaissance over timeline pressure? The evidence suggests yes. A 24-hour reconnaissance pass with available drone assets would have identified the minefield density on the approach axis. Whether that information would have changed the assault decision in an environment of command pressure to produce results is a separate and darker question. Second, what does this engagement model suggest for NATO defensive doctrine against the kind of mass armor assaults that Russian doctrine envisions for a hypothetical NATO Axis operation? The Toretsk geometry is not Ukraine-specific. Any defender with prepared minefields, integrated drone coverage, and pre-registered anti-tank fires can replicate this result against a column formation on a fixed axis. The lesson is transferable, and NATO planners are watching. Third, what is the next operational decision point on the Toretsk axis? Russia has not abandoned its push in this direction. The strategic logic of controlling the Toretsk ridgeline has not changed. Additional assault attempts are consistent with the pattern of grinding operational pressure that has characterized Russian operations in this theater throughout 2024 and 2025. The question is whether the next assault will look different from the one described here, or whether the same road will see the same formation, the same result, and 14 more entries in the Oryx loss database. If you want that analysis when it happens, this channel covers it weekly, with the same level of OSINT sourcing and tactical reconstruction. Subscribe, and you will not miss it. The road outside Toretsk is quiet now, marked by scorch patterns on the tarmac and the angular silhouettes of destroyed hulls that Ukrainian drone operators have documented in the days following the engagement. Each hull is a data point. Each data point is an argument about what kind of war this is and how long the side that wages it this way can sustain the cost. The answer, written in steel and fire on a 300-meter road in Donetsk Oblast, is not indefinitely.